Hello, it's Scott Manley here with part 33 of Kerbal's Spaceships Are Serious Business. And, well, it is before the decade is out. In fact, it's less than 7 years after we mastered supersonic flight. Gail Porter is going to be the first Kerbal on the moon, and hopefully the first Kerbal to return from the moon, because in Kerbal space programs such things are not certain. Anyway, we are performing lunar orbit insertion here. Set up the maneuver node already, and thankfully you guys don't have to sit through a good 4 or 5 minutes of rocket burn as we decelerate the spacecraft and bring it into a nice tight orbit around a body which most humans can only look up in the sky at rather than look down at from, orbit above it. There we go. We've got a capture. We are committed. We have plenty of Delta V in this stage and plenty of Delta V in our reserve return stage. That is the one danger. Well, okay, other than crashing. Assuming we don't crash, we have reserve power to bring us back home if everything else goes wrong. This is, of course, using the AJ-10 engine. Not the same engine as the Apollo spacecraft used, because this has a lot less mass. It's a lot simpler, it's a lot lighter, and it's only carrying one crew member. This is perhaps closer to the Russian plan, which would be to send one astronaut to the moon. Their docking technology wasn't nearly as mature as the US docking technology. Their launchers certainly weren't quite as capable, although of course it's well known that the individual engines on the giant N1 rocket were actually fantastically high-tech, but unfortunately had a habit of exploding. A fact which did not discourage Orbital Sciences from using their engines on their Antares launcher, until of course they exploded spectacularly. Speaking of which, the Antares launcher is expected to launch another payload to the space station soon. Yeah, the Antares is moving towards using RD-181 engines, which are from the same family as the RD-180 engines used on the Atlas V, which was used as an interim launch vehicle for Orbital Sciences on their space station contract. The RD-181 gets about half as much thrust. Anyway, speaking of thrust, we're finished on this thrust, on this burn, and now we are in orbit. Our periaps is going to be about 30 kilometers, which is about as good as I could ask for. Any lower, and it would make getting everything figured out a little harder. I'd had to have probably boosted it back up, but 30 is a nice number. So just going to set up the maneuver here, and then we're going to wait until we move all the way around the other side of the planet, other side of the moon, and get ourselves set up for the circularization burn here. I mean, obviously we want to be as close to the surface of the moon as possible when we drop the lander, because the lander, we want it to use the least amount of fuel possible. We want to have the biggest amount of margin to make sure that we can safely return to space. That being said, since all we're doing is transferring Gail, we don't actually care about the rest of the spacecraft. We will have an extra 500 meters per second, which isn't in my Delta V stats. Also, note the negative velocity in the Delta V stats. Don't trust those numbers. They're a little weird when you start having engines pointing in the wrong direction. So, now it is time for Gail to step out and perform the EVA across. Due to an accident with the docking, actually, no, that's not an accident. Due to the way that I rotated the spacecraft, the hatches are on the wrong side. I should have probably thought about that when I was designing this mission. Either ensure that the translation or the rotation was in the yaw rather than the pitch. That was my mistake. Make note for future procedures manuals. So, I mean, the Soviet design for their mission, they would have actually required the astronaut to EVA across the space. They would have literally joined the two spacecraft together using something akin to a harpoon and a grid of holes. That's what I've been told. I believe Alexei Leonov was the chosen, or the most likely candidate for this. He did some training towards it. He, of course, was the first person to perform a spacewalk in space, became very close to being the first person to suffocate in a spacesuit because they were unable to get back inside the spaceship because the spacesuit had ballooned just a little. Thankfully, he was a resourceful individual and managed to get back inside safely. Anyway, Gail sends such thoughts out of her head as she starts to fire up the retro system or the reaction control system and carefully move away from the spacecraft. We've already used some fuel from this. I should have probably transferred fuel to the lander, but too late now. We are committed. I think we have more than enough Delta V here, and it's just a question now of making sure that we pick the appropriate landing site. Translate, rotate, and now point in the correct direction. Landing gear deployed. The spacecraft will hopefully remain in a stable parking orbit. Rotate to landing attitude, and now it's just a case of waiting until we line up with the southern point here. So, having surveyed the moon with a satellite, we know that this area should be a relatively interesting region to land. Actually, what we did was I looked at a biome map and said, I haven't hit that biome, so let's do it. So wait until we get down here, and I basically completely eyeballed this whole thing. Just decided this is the time to go. We also got more science, so that's a good sign. Apparently we never got this kind of science from this region, so that will be nice to bring it home with us. We actually have antenna on this spacecraft, and I considered transmitting the science home until I realized that we were in fact on the far side of the moon and therefore would not be able to get any of the science back home. Yeah, bit of poor planning there. We launched when the moon was waning rather than waxing, and therefore ended up landing on the far side of the moon. Can't be helped, we'll just have to perform the landing in the blind. We can't even relay through that other spacecraft because it doesn't have the transmitter component on it. Okay, and we're set up. We are rotated into position. Engine is fired up. This is the Lunar descent engine from the Apollo lander. I'm using this because it has really deep throttling capability. It can throttle down to 11% of maximum throttle. Also worth noting is that this version only allows for 3 ignitions, and that I think is based upon the performance in the Apollo 13 mission. Now, as I understand it, this was a pressure-fed engine, and it was kind of cool what they would do. Well, I'd say it's kind of cool, it's kind of janky, I don't know. They would basically feed the fuel into the engine using pressurized helium. And once you started the engine, the helium would just continue to feed into the engine, into the fuel tanks slowly. And that could actually lead to the fuel tanks rupturing. So there was a safety system that essentially, after a while of use, some amount of time, the disc would rupture, the fuel would leak out, and that would be fine, because that would of course be days after a landing on a moon. Of course, in Apollo 13 they had to use the engine to do a mid-course correction to put them back onto a free return trajectory and then a return burn. So they were using the engine for days instead of hours, and as it happened on day 6 of the mission of Apollo 13, the fuel pressurization system did rupture as designed, but thankfully at that point they were already on a close enough trajectory. They only needed reaction control thrusters to return them safely. Anyway, my point is 3 burns. 3 ignitions. I don't think that's realistic. Anyway, never mind. Perhaps I'm misunderstanding this. So, because of the 3 ignition limit, this caused a particularly interesting issue on descent. So let's go back to old me to find out what happened. Okay, so I think we've run into a problem here. We are 2 kilometers up, and even at the minimum amount of thrust, we have slowed ourselves far too much. So I think what I'm going to do, I could turn the engine off, but then I'd only have 2 ignitions left, and I need at least 1 for return. What I'm going to do is I'm going to angle this spacecraft, right? Look at this. So by turning the spacecraft sideways, it means our thrust vector is less vertical, and therefore we should be starting to fall faster. So what I'm going to do is wobble it back and forth, and hopefully increase our descent speed while maintaining control. Maybe I could try just like a complete 360 loop. I don't know, Gail Porter isn't a pilot. I do have the smart ASS enabled. We do have a flight computer on this. I'm not totally relying on Gail's flying skills. I am relying on her analytic skills to make sure that the descent happens. So we are at least maintaining our vertical descent speed. We're now approaching the 1 kilometer mark. Our lateral speed is bouncing around quite high. It's bouncing above the constraints, let's say, for a safe landing. But that's fine, we just need to null out those lateral velocities when we get to the surface. We will hopefully have plenty of time to do that. The other thing is, we are kind of using up a bit of fuel here. I mean, I don't know how much delta V we're wasting, but there's the shadow. Very important. Down to 400 meters. 400 meters. Should I kill this? I think we might be okay here. 17 meters per second. 16, 15, 14. I think I still need a bit of oscillation here. I'm just trying to make sure that the descent rate continues at a high enough rate. Null out the velocity. 9, 8. You know what? Again, I'm still slowing down too quickly. Still slowing down far too quickly. Let's, I don't want to cut the engine, though. Ah! Darn it. Here's me. Like, I'm one of those people that plays RPGs and just ends up, you know, storing everything just in case. I end up running through the whole game without using all the fancy toys because they're all consumables. Okay, just a little bit of a spiral here, picking up that vertical speed. Kill lateral speed. Come on, I wanna stop. I think. Okay, and look, our vertical speed is essentially cutting out. Great, that's not good. We're gonna go up again. Damn it! Let's just cut the engine and see how fast we hit the ground at 4, 3, 5, 6. Hey, totally worked. Excellent. I mean, to be fair, the lunar module, the real lunar module was designed to fall from something like 30 feet safely under the moon, so I think that's probably within that realm. Anyway, yeah, apparently we are getting outside because I clicked on the science alert button, but that is science from floating above things. That's what that is. Let's get the other science first. All the science from the moon. Lots of science being captured by the scientist Gail Porter. First Kerbal on the moon. The real moon. Okay, and we need to plant a flag, of course. We need to send her down to the surface so that she can collect that all-important stuff. So that she can rub her feet in the soil, you know, feel what it's like. Get my science, and... Oh, that's interesting. We only get a little bit of science there. Now, let's go for a walk on the moon. One small step for a Kerbal, one giant leap for Kerbal kind. Yeah, look at her. I like the way the moonscape is silhouetted in her visor. She has much to do here. Look, there we go, spacecraft. Spacecraft reflected. Did I say silhouetted? I meant reflected because I am a complete idiot. It's actually fake reflection. It builds a cube map. But you guys knew that. You're all Wait a second. Why don't I have the ability to plant a flag? Where is my flag? Did you forget the flag, Gail? No, you're just going, wow. You're just going, wow, wow. And everyone's like, where's your flag? Yes, sadly, without a flag, the neighbors will not be impressed. I don't know what happened there. There is some glitch. I certainly have all the relevant buildings unlocked back home, so I'm just going to call it a glitch, and this is exactly why I think I'm finishing this playthrough soon. Anyway, time to return to space. We need to wait for the return vehicle to pass overhead, and once it gets close enough, we will be ready to launch. We have 135 meters per second of delta V to get us started, and then from there we have the smaller Ascent propulsion system to make sure that we make it all the way. We've obviously transferred all the science out of this landing stage because it's going to fall back to the moon and return from whence, well, return in little pieces. It might make some nice wreckage. At 130 meters per second, that's going to make quite a mess on the surface of the moon. The moon itself will be fine, but it'll be scattered into tiny little pieces. So the Ascent propulsion system uses these little 1 kilonewton thrusters here. Has 4 of them, of course, because it's quite a large mass. We're using the standard kerosene nitrogen tetroxide mix. And we are actually pretty close to the limit in terms of delta V requirement. But we still have that contingency plan that if we run out of fuel in this stage, Gail can grab the science and go flying out on her own. And we now have the recovery spacecraft, or sorry, I don't know what you call it, the return spacecraft catching up on us very, very quickly. It looks like we might not get up to orbital speed in time. It seems that in all this chaos, we have a small rotation set up. I'm just going to cancel that out as the egotistical goat parent ship flies past below us. We're about a kilometre above it, and maybe, yeah, we must be a couple of kilometres west of it as well, or south of it. Yeah, we're south of it, and it's flying north of us. So our inclination is pretty close, but we're 0.3, 0.2, so I'm just decreasing that. Eventually, we should get that down as close as possible, because otherwise we could run out of fuel. Oh, are we going to get there? I think we are going to get there. Now, do we have enough fuel to perform a rendezvous is the real question. And there, little burns, little tiny little burns. And that's us. That's us in our pursuit orbit. Next thing we need to do is perform a small inclination correction maneuver. We're 0.31 degrees away, which does not seem like much, but 0.31 degrees is quite a lot. I mean, 0.31 degrees on Earth is something like 20 miles. So on the moon, it's a lot smaller because it's a different size of body. So we're still, kilometers away. There we go. Ooh, that's a nice crater down there. Unfortunately, despite my correction of the roll, it seems that we have picked up another roll maneuver, or another induced roll. I'm going to pretend that I deliberately did that. I'm going to call it the barbecue roll for thermal management. And there we go. Line that up. Just very, very small. 0.01. I will take 0.01. 0.01 is just about as good as I can hope for. Let's now make some other corrections to our closest approach. 2 kilometers. You see this? I'm just adjusting my timing and watching the rendezvous planner window so that we've got our closest approach down to within a couple of kilometers. We're now going to fly around, and when we get close to that first approach, or we get 90 degrees away from that approach, I'm going to try and make some more corrections to make sure that we end up passing much closer to the target. We have about 50 meters per second of delta V, which sounds like an absolutely minuscule amount. I mean, it's like 150 feet per second, which is pretty, is more than enough for a rendezvous if you know what you're doing. And by know what you're doing, what I really mean is are patient and actually figure out what you're doing instead of just pointing and thrusting. Pointing and thrusting works if you have plenty of delta V, but in Kerbal Space Program Realism Overhaul, in the real-life version, you have to be a little more careful. In fact, I'm being so careful, I have employed the power of the Maneuver Node Editor, which lets me actually punch in numbers and get a 5 meters per second burn that will bring my rendezvous distance down to less than a half a kilometer. So, of course, the way to do this is using very slight pulses. People, by the way, keep telling me, hey, you can adjust the thrust limits on these things, the thrust limiters. No, you can't adjust the thrust limiters in Realism Overhaul because you can't do that on real spacecraft. I could have turned off 2 of those thrusters, though. I hadn't really thought of that at the time. But never mind. Egotistical goat, we are now we are adjusting our approach to within 130 meters. This is where it starts to get hard because simply by rotating the spacecraft using the reaction control system is adjusting our closest approach. So 30 meters, that's pretty good. Except, again, rotating is causing the thing to increase. Darn it! Being foiled by my own control scheme. I'm trying to get in close here, but no, you won't let me. You won't let me be coming in close and facing the same direction at the right time. It's like quantum mechanics where we can't know the momentum and position of a particle exactly simultaneously. This is the Werner von Braun uncertainty principle for a poorly designed spacecraft. Egotistical goat. It's in range. We are knowing all about it. And finally, we're going to start making little corrections here. 14 meters. It's definitely close enough to EVA. I could consider docking, but I think I'm not going to. We have our delta V is now dropped to about 20 meters per second, and with the deceleration burn, I think I'm just going to accept what I have here. We just need to bring the science across this distance. This is going to be quite an impressive leap. You thought the leap onto the lunar surface... Sorry, the lunar surface... Mooner? Who uses the word mooner? What world has a planet called the moon with the adjective mooner? Yeah, it's quite a leap to travel between these spacecraft about 30 feet apart. And actually, the camera gets stuck for some reason, so I was unable to rotate the camera, so I pretty much had to move her and guess where the cue would appear to let me grab on. And we got it, yeah. Did I mention that I'm finishing this series? But not yet, we'll be back. Until then, I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.